From the surface, the ocean looks calm, but hundreds of meters below, an enormous... And somewhere at the very beginning of that journey, there would be no giant body at all. One cell, a microscopic structure floating inside a protected biological environment. Imagine a strange biological egg of an leviathan, roughly 10 centimeters across. The 25-kilometer leviathan. Imagine looking down into the ocean and seeing a creature so enormous that you can't even see where its body. The moment the tiny sea eater larva enters the open ocean, everything changes. Its protective egg is gone. There is no... 2 years have passed. The fragile larva is gone. In its place is a young, iridescent blue sea eater, nearly 1 meter long.
Imagine looking out across the open ocean and realizing that somewhere beneath you, something 25 kilometers long is moving through the darkness. Not 25 meters. Not 250 meters. 25 kilometers. A creature so enormous that its body would stretch farther than many cities. For centuries, legends have whispered about a monster called the Sea Eater, a white leviathan said to consume anything that enters its territory. But here is the fascinating question. What if we stopped treating the Sea Eater like a monster and started treating it like an animal? If such a creature somehow evolved in the deep ocean, it could not simply appear at enormous size. It would need to begin with a single cell. It would need to develop, grow, transform, survive crushing pressure, darkness, freezing temperatures, and an environment where food is incredibly scarce. So let's imagine the complete life of one sea eater, from its first microscopic stage to the moment it becomes the largest creature the ocean has ever known. This is speculative biology. But if the creature were real, this is what its journey might look like. Day 1. The story begins inside an enormous egg, roughly 10 centimeters across. The egg is protected by a thick outer capsule made from tough biological material, shielding the developing embryo from the surrounding environment. Inside, the first divisions begin. 1 cell becomes 2. 2 become 4. Then hundreds. Then thousands. At this stage, there is nothing that looks remotely like a sea monster. Only a rapidly developing cluster of cells. But something important is already happening. The embryo begins establishing its basic body plan. One end will eventually become the front. The other will become the rear. The foundation of a creature measuring kilometers in length is being established before it has even entered the ocean. Day 60. The embryo is still protected inside its capsule. But now, the transformation becomes more dramatic. Major tissue layers begin separating and organizing. Primitive structures appear that could eventually develop into muscles, digestive organs, connective tissues, and the nervous system. The creature is no longer simply multiplying cells. It is beginning to build a body. And then comes one of the most important moments of its life. Day 61. A tiny transparent larva finally emerges. It is only a few millimeters long. Compared with the adult sea eater, it is almost invisible. The young larva moves through the water using microscopic structures along its body and feeds on tiny organisms suspended in the water. For the first time, it is completely exposed to the ocean. And survival is no longer guaranteed. Every movement costs energy. Every meal matters. Every predator is a potential death sentence. But if it survives, something extraordinary begins. Year 2. The animal has now reached roughly 1 meter. The microscopic swimming structures of its larval stage are no longer enough. Muscles become the primary source of movement. Its long body begins producing powerful waves of muscular motion, allowing it to move efficiently through the water. The mouth becomes larger. A primitive tail structure develops. And the creature begins transitioning from a fragile larva into something much more powerful. But this is only the beginning. Year 5. The sea eater reaches approximately 3 meters. Its body enters a period of intense growth. Instead of spending all of its energy on movement, it begins storing enormous reserves of energy in the form of lipids and glycogen. Think of it as preparing for a biological construction project. Because the next stage will require something extraordinary. Its cells are preparing for massive tissue growth. Muscle. Connective tissue. Organs. And eventually, the enormous structures that will define the adult creature. Year 6. The animal begins moving deeper. Much deeper. The sunlight disappears. The temperature drops. Pressure increases with every kilometer. Eventually, the young sea eater reaches the cold abyssal environment where almost no large animals could survive. Here, its metabolism slows dramatically. To survive this hostile environment, imagine that it enters a dormant state. Its body surrounds itself with a protective mucus-rich layer, forming something resembling a biological cocoon. Inside that darkness, one of the strangest transformations begins. Hormonal signals activate. Growth patterns change. And structures that were previously impossible to see begin forming. Year 9. The creature is now hidden inside a cocoon nearly 7 meters long. Inside, its body is changing again. Paired limb-like structures begin developing from the surrounding tissue. Around the mouth, supporting cartilage begins strengthening. The front portion of the nervous system becomes more complex. The animal is no longer simply getting bigger. It is becoming something fundamentally different. And when it finally emerges, it is 12 meters long. Year 15. 2 short appendages now extend from the front of its body. They are still primitive. But they will eventually become enormous. Its internal support system has strengthened enough to handle its rapidly increasing size. And from this point forward, growth becomes the defining feature of its life. Year 30. The sea eater reaches approximately 50 meters. Its arms have begun extending rapidly. Muscle tissue continues multiplying. Specialized gripping surfaces develop along the appendages. And around its mouth, powerful muscles create the ability to generate intense suction. At this point, it is no longer surviving primarily on microscopic food. It has become an active predator. And the deeper it goes, the fewer creatures are capable of escaping it. But then something happens that changes everything. The sea eater keeps growing. Year 80. 500 meters. Half a kilometer. The creature is now so large that ordinary growth would no longer be enough. Instead, imagine a specialized growth region near the rear of its body continuously adding new tissue. Its tail and fin structures expand. Its body becomes increasingly adapted to moving through enormous volumes of deep ocean water. And somewhere in the darkness, a creature half a kilometer long is now hunting. Yet this is still nowhere near its final size. Year 200. 1 kilometer. At this scale, controlling the entire body with a conventional centralized nervous system would be an enormous challenge. A hypothetical solution would be a distributed network of nerve centers throughout the body. Each region could respond locally while remaining connected to the rest of the animal. Its enormous mouth generates powerful suction. Its appendages scan the surrounding darkness. And because there is almost no light, other senses become critical. Pressure changes. Vibrations. Chemical traces. Movement in the water. The sea eater would not need to see its prey clearly. It could potentially feel the ocean around itself. Year 480. 5 kilometers. Now the animal has reached a scale beyond anything known in Earth's oceans. Its reproductive system begins maturing. At the same time, the body wall would need extraordinary structural strength to support its enormous mass and withstand the pressure of the deep. Dense connective tissues could theoretically provide additional reinforcement. But even at 5 kilometers, the creature is not finished growing. Not even close. Year 1500. 20 kilometers. At this point, the sea eater has lived longer than almost any familiar animal. Its growth has continued for centuries. Its enormous appendages now stretch for kilometers. They are no longer simply arms. They could function as enormous sensory structures, allowing the animal to detect movement and chemical changes across huge areas of the surrounding ocean. Imagine descending into complete darkness. And realizing that the faint structure ahead of you isn't a rock formation. It is one of its limbs. And it keeps going. And going. Until it disappears into the darkness. Then comes the final stage. Year 1979. The sea eater reaches its hypothetical maximum length. 25 kilometers. 25 kilometers of living tissue moving through the abyss. At this stage, its endocrine system triggers its final reproductive cycle. Millions of reproductive cells are released. Some would rise toward shallower waters. Others would remain deep. The purpose is simple. Continue the lineage. A creature that has spent nearly 2,000 years growing now begins the process of creating the next generation. And then. Year 2000. The sea eater is still approximately 25 kilometers long. But time has finally begun winning the battle. Cellular repair becomes less efficient. Damage accumulates. Metabolic stress increases. The enormous body that once seemed almost unstoppable begins to fail. Eventually, the giant dies. And when a creature this large dies in the deep ocean, its story does not end. Its body sinks. Deeper. And deeper. Until the enormous carcass reaches the abyssal floor. There, it becomes something completely different. A food source. A habitat. An ecosystem. Bacteria begin consuming the tissue. Small organisms arrive. Larger predators follow. For years, perhaps decades, the dead leviathan could sustain an entire community of deep-sea organisms. The sea eater would become an ecosystem even after it stopped being an animal. And that brings us back to the original question. Could a 25-kilometer creature actually exist? Based on everything we know about biology, there would be enormous problems. Food requirements. Oxygen transport. Structural support. Energy expenditure. Growth. Reproduction. And the physical limitations created by its own massive body. So the sea eater is not a confirmed animal. It is a biological thought experiment. A way to ask one fascinating question. If evolution pushed life toward an extreme we have never seen, where would the limits actually be? Because the deep ocean remains one of the least explored environments on our planet. And beneath those black waters are creatures that already look like they belong in mythology. The sea eater may be fiction. But the real ocean has already proven something important. Sometimes. Reality doesn't need a monster story to be terrifying. If you enjoyed this journey into speculative deep-sea biology, subscribe for more stories exploring the creatures that could exist at the absolute limits of life. And remember, the deeper we go, the stranger the ocean becomes.